I've been swimming open water since college, and by August 2019 I had it down to a system. Dawn workouts at the same lake in the west suburbs of the Twin Cities. 5 days a week, sometimes 6 if my knee was cooperating. The lake was small, maybe 3/4 of a mile across the long way, with a public beach on the north side and a boat ramp on the south. Almost nobody was ever there before 6 in the morning. That was the whole point. I'd park at the boat ramp lot, walk down through the reeds in flip-flops, leave a dry bag under a specific bench, and swim a loop that traced the shoreline about 30 feet out. 2 full loops on a normal day, wetsuit in the shoulder seasons, jammers in July and August. When you swim alone in a lake, you get careful about routine. You want to be predictable to yourself, if that makes sense. You learn the water temp, you learn where the weeds start, you learn which dock has the aluminum ladder in case you cramp up. In August, the water was 74 degrees, warm on the top, and cold if you kicked deep, and there was almost always a low fog on the surface until the sun burned it off around 6:30. The first time I saw the guy was a Tuesday in the last week of July. He was sitting on the far side of the lake, on the strip of grass between the road and the water where nobody really sits. Not on the beach, not on a dock, just a spot in the middle of nothing. Camp chair, dark jacket. I noticed him because I was doing a sighting breath and my head turned that way, and there was a shape that hadn't been there yesterday. I finished the loop, did my second, got out. When I looked back, he was still there. Fine. Guy watching the sunrise. It happens. Wednesday, he was there again. Same spot, same chair. I got to the parking lot at 5:20 that day, which was earlier than usual, and when I walked down to the water, I could already see him across the lake through the mist. His car had to be somewhere, but I couldn't see one on the road that side. Thursday, same. Friday, same. I skipped the weekend because I had a wedding to drive to, and when I came back Monday, he was in the chair. Different jacket, I think. Same posture. Both hands on his thighs. No fishing rod, no dog, no coffee cup that I could see. Just sitting. By the end of the second week, I was more annoyed than anything. It's a public shoreline. Anybody can sit on it, and I'm a grown man doing laps in a wetsuit, so what am I gonna do? Ask him to leave? Whatever. But I started clocking little things. He never had gear. He never got up to walk around. And a couple times I sighted early during my warm-up and caught him with what looked like binoculars, though when I looked again on the next breath, his hands were back on his knees. One morning I came in early because I couldn't sleep, a little before 5, and his chair was already set up on the far grass. He was already sitting in it, still as anything, drinking from a thermos. He'd gotten there in the dark. That could be nothing. When you're swimming freestyle and turning your head every third stroke, you get maybe a quarter second of clean vision each time. Your brain fills in the rest. Still. Third week I changed things up. I told a buddy about it over beers, and he laughed and said the guy was probably just a bird nerd. Loons come through in August, which is true. But my buddy also said, half joking, "You should just walk over and ask what he's doing." I said I'd think about it. I didn't want to walk up to him, not really. He was a big guy from what I could see across the water, and the road on that side is quiet enough that if something went sideways, nobody would notice for a while. I've done enough dumb things in my life to know when I don't want to add one to the list, so I decided to check on his car instead. Here's what I did. Wednesday of week 3, I swam my first loop like normal. Halfway through the second loop, instead of coming back to the boat ramp, I cut across the middle of the lake toward the neighborhood on the east side. There's a little swimming beach there attached to a HOA that technically I'm not supposed to use, but nobody's ever there at 6 in the morning either. I climbed out at the beach, walked barefoot up a wooded path in my jammers, and came out onto the residential street. My feet were freezing on the pavement, and I probably looked insane to anyone watching from a kitchen window, but nobody was up. From there, I looped around, keeping trees between me and the water. It took me maybe 20 minutes to get to the west side of the lake where the guy was sitting. I stayed back in the tree line and watched him for a while. He was still there, still not doing anything. Just facing the water where I usually came out. His car was parked about 50 yards down the road, half in the ditch, half on the shoulder. Gray sedan, older model, one of those bland ones you don't remember unless you're trying to remember it. I stayed in the trees and worked my way closer until I was in the yard of a lake house that clearly had nobody home. Grill cover on, blinds down, mail piled up in the porch box. I got the plate. Full plate, 4 letters, 3 numbers, Minnesota. I got the make and model as best I could tell, and I made notes on the guy himself, since I could see him better now from behind. Bald on top, gray on the sides, heavy through the shoulders, work boots. There was a coffee thermos on the ground next to the chair I hadn't seen from the water. Then I did the long walk back the way I came. Through the trees, down the path, back into the water at the HOA beach, and I swam the rest of the way across to the boat ramp. My arms were shaking by the time I got out, and it wasn't from the swim. I remember standing on the ramp in the shallow dripping, feeling like an idiot for being scared, and also feeling like I'd just done something important. It's a weird combination, like when you finally check the weird noise in the basement and it's the water heater, except you don't know yet if it's the water heater. I walked up to the lot. There were 2 cars in the boat ramp lot, mine and a red pickup that belonged to a fisherman I'd seen once or twice, a retired guy who fished the South End. His truck had been there when I arrived, so that was fine. There was a piece of paper folded under my windshield wiper. I didn't touch it right away. I walked a slow circle around the car first, looking at the ground and under the bumpers. Then I lifted the wiper with 2 fingers and pulled the paper out by a corner. It was a printer sheet, white, folded in half. When I opened it, my hands were still wet and the paper started to buckle at the edges. Inside, printed in a plain font, not handwritten, was a description of my route. Not vague, specific. Enters water 522 to 538. Boat ramp side, under bench, 2 loops counterclockwise. Sights every 3 strokes to the north-northwest. Ladder at Cochrane Dock as you're out. Cochrane was a name I didn't know. I found out later it's the family that owns the 3rd dock on the west shore. The one I'd mentally noted as my emergency exit if I cramped. At the bottom of the paper, 1 line. You're very visible from the shore. That was it. No signature, no threat, no demand. I stood there in a wet wetsuit in the sun coming up, and I don't remember what I thought. I remember I looked around for him. I remember I looked back down at the paper. I remember thinking he must have driven around while I was in the trees. He must have known I was gone from the water and used that window. I got in the car. I locked the doors, which I never do in that lot. I sat there for a couple minutes and wrote down everything I could remember about him and the sedan on the back of a gas station receipt from the cup holder. Plate number first in case I forgot it, then the description, then the exact wording of the note in case I lost the note somehow. I drove straight to the police station in the town over, not the little sheriff's substation by the lake, the real one. The officer I talked to was maybe my age, patient, took the note in a plastic sleeve and wrote down what I told her. She didn't tell me I was overreacting, and she didn't tell me I wasn't. She said they'd run the plate and she'd call me. She asked if I had somewhere else I could swim for a while. I said yes. She called me back the next afternoon. The car was registered to a man in his 50s who lived about 40 minutes away, on the other side of the metro. He had a prior, stalking, in a different county, 3 years earlier. She wouldn't tell me the details of that case, only that it was a similar pattern of behavior with a female victim. She asked if I wanted to pursue a restraining order, and I said yes. The order came through inside of a week. I got a copy in the mail and a phone call from a different officer telling me it had been served. He'd been cooperative, apparently. Didn't argue, signed the paperwork, and left. I didn't go back to the lake for 2 months. When I did, I picked a different time, late morning, when the beach had families on it and the docks had kids jumping off. I swam a shorter loop closer to the middle. I sighted more than I needed to, on every breath for the first few laps, just to make sure the far shore stayed empty of anyone in a camp chair. I still swim there, not at dawn anymore. The building had been empty for 3 years, so the smell of fried onions in the north stairwell was the first thing that stopped me. Not old grease, not the ghost of a food court that shut down in 2019. Fresh, like someone had cooked breakfast an hour before we walked in. The buyer, a guy from Columbus, was 2 steps behind me with a flashlight and a folder. It was January in Cleveland, the kind of morning where the sky is one flat sheet of gray and your breath comes out in slow clouds even indoors. The heat had been off in the mall since the last tenant left. My hands were already going numb through my gloves. I'd done maybe 40 of these walkthroughs. Dead retail is a whole genre. Foreclosed strip malls, big box carcasses off the interstate. That old Kmart in Parma someone tried to turn into an indoor go-kart track. You get used to the same things. Roof leaks, pigeons, the particular gray-yellow of ceiling tiles that have absorbed 20 years of fluorescent light. You do not get used to the smell of hot cooking oil in a building that has not had a working kitchen since the Obama administration. Ray sniffed and looked at me. Somebody in here? Squatters, maybe. It happens. We'll clear whoever it is and move on. I said it the way you say it when you want the client to keep walking, because squatters is a problem you solve with a phone call. Squatters is one guy in a sleeping bag near a busted vending machine. Squatters is not something you plan around. The mall was on the east side, off a service road that used to feed a couple of factories. 2 levels of retail wrapped around a central atrium, with a 3rd floor that had been offices. Skylights over the middle, half of them cracked and taped over. Ray was maybe 50, a landlord type, wanted to convert the building to self-storage and light industrial. He had the money and he had the plan, which is rarer than you'd think in that market. We started on the ground floor. I pointed out the load-bearing walls, the electrical room, the sprinkler risers. Ray took notes. On the second floor, I noticed the trash. Not a lot. Not what you'd expect from squatters. A crushed water bottle in the middle of what used to be a footlocker. A single latex glove near the escalator. A cheap plastic lighter sitting on top of a mall directory like someone had set it down and forgotten it. All of it clean. No dust on any of it. I picked up the lighter. Still had fluid in it. "How long you say this place been closed?" Ray asked. "Since 2019. He looked at the lighter in my hand and did not say anything. Just clicked his own flashlight off and back on, which was a thing he did when he was thinking. We took the frozen escalator up to 3. That's when I heard the voice. It was faint, and it was on the far side of the atrium, and I could not make out any words. A man's voice, low, giving what sounded like an instruction, then quiet. Then another voice answered, from somewhere further back. Not English. I don't know what it was. Something with harder consonants than Spanish, softer than Russian. I only caught it for maybe 3 seconds before it stopped. Ray had heard it too. He was standing very still. "You said squatters," he said. "That's what I said." I pulled my phone out. No signal on my carrier up on the 3rd floor, not surprising. The whole building was concrete and rebar. I put it away. I told myself, and this is the part I keep coming back to, that we should just leave. Walk down the escalator, get in our cars, and I would call the non-emergency line from the parking lot. That is what I should have done. Instead, I took another step toward the sound. I have thought about why for 2 years now, and the honest answer is that I did not really believe it. Some part of me was already writing the email to my broker. Small group of homeless folks cleared them out, closing on schedule. I wanted the sale. Ray wanted the building, so I walked. The 3rd floor was set up like offices originally, a long hallway with glass front suites on either side. Old signs still hung above some of the doors. A dentist, a payday loan place, a tax preparer with a cartoon eagle on the logo. The 3rd door on the left was open. Someone had pried the lock off. I could see the strike plate lying on the carpet, fresh scratches on the metal, no rust. I did not want to look inside. I looked inside. The room was maybe 400 square feet, and every foot of it was being used. Mattresses on the floor, 6 of them, jammed edge to edge, sheets kicked to one side like people had gotten up recently. A folding table against the far wall with 2 camping burners on it, the small kind, blue butane canisters underneath, a stack of paper plates. A plastic bag of onions, half used, the skins scattered, clothes folded in piles by the wall, sorted by size, men's clothes, work clothes, boots lined up neat. On the burner, still warm when I held my hand over it, a small dented pot, rice at the bottom, sticking to the sides, steam still coming off it in a thin thread. Behind me, Ray said very quietly, "Oh." The next suite was the same, and the one after that. Someone had built cheap plywood partitions inside, dividing the offices into smaller sleeping areas, 4 or 5 per room. I counted mattresses without meaning to. I got to 20 and stopped counting because it did not matter anymore. There was a bucket in one corner that I did not want to think about the purpose of. There were toothbrushes lined up on a paper towel like a family photo. None of it was hidden. That's the part I keep getting stuck on. Nobody had tried to hide any of this. They just did not expect anyone to come up here on a Wednesday morning in January. At the end of the hall was what used to be a conference room. The glass was covered from the inside with brown paper. The door was ajar. I pushed it with the back of my hand, not wanting to leave prints, and I do not know why I cared about that at that moment, but I did. Inside, on the wall opposite the door, someone had written on the drywall with a black marker, large block letters in English, careful and even. It was a schedule. Days of the week down the left side, times of day across the top, in 4-hour blocks. In each cell, 3 sets of initials, a K, DM, RJ-2. Some I could not read. Every block, 3 people, all the way around the clock. Nobody skipped, nobody doubled up. At the top, underlined twice, 1 word, guards. I read it twice because my brain refused to accept it the first time. 3 at a time, every 4 hours, around the clock, for 20 people who slept on the floor and ate rice on a camping stove and left their boots by the wall. Guards for what? Guards for who? I turned around. Ray was in the hallway behind me. He had not come into the conference room. His face was the color of the ceiling tiles. "I'm out," he said. "I'm out. I don't want it. Tell your broker I'm out." "Ray, I don't want the building. I don't want to know. I'm leaving." He was already walking. Fast. Not running, but fast. I followed him. Neither of us said anything on the escalator or on the ground floor or through the parking lot. He got into his rental and drove out of the lot without looking at me. I never saw him in person again. I sat in my car for maybe 2 minutes. Engine off. watching the front doors of the mall. Nobody came out. I drove to a speedway on the corner and I called the non-emergency line from the parking lot because I did not trust myself to remember an address if I called 911. I told the dispatcher what I had seen. I used the word trafficking without really knowing if that was what it was. She asked me to stay where I was. I stayed. 2 officers came out and talked to me for maybe 20 minutes. One of them wrote everything down in a notebook that had a rubber band around it. The other one asked me 3 times whether I had touched anything, and every time I said the lighter, and every time he wrote it down again. They went in with a larger team about an hour later. I did not go back with them. I watched from across the service road, and I ate a gas station sandwich I could not taste. They came out with people, not all at once. One at a time, then in pairs. Men mostly. A couple of them were limping. One had a bandage on his hand that looked like it had been changed recently, but not recently enough. They were wearing coats that did not fit. Some of them looked at the sky like they had not been outside in a while and it was too bright out for January. 18. That's what the paper said the next day. 18 people found on the 3rd floor of a mall I had been trying to sell. No ID on any of them. Several with injuries in various stages of healing. The owner of the building was picked up about a month later at an address in a suburb I will not name. He had not been the one on the schedule. The initials on the wall belonged to other people, and I do not know what happened to them. And the detective I spoke to said in a very careful way that it was an ongoing matter. I kept my license. I kept working. I stopped doing walkthroughs alone. The building was demolished that summer. I drove past the empty lot once, on my way to something else, and I did not stop. The job at the plant in Joplin was supposed to be the boring one. That was the whole point. Nights, alone, no cattle on the floor, just me and a work order and a flashlight. I took it because my last job had a shift lead who talked, and I was tired of people. The place sits off Route 43, past the truck stop with the busted sign. It looks like every packing plant you've driven past on a highway. Long, low buildings, chain link, floodlights buzzing over an empty lot. Inside, it's colder than you expect, even after they shut the line down for the night and cut the refrigeration back. The concrete holds it. Your breath fogs a little around 3 in the morning, when the floor has been quiet for hours. My work was simple. Grease the trolleys on the overhead rail. Check the hydraulics on the stunners. Change filters. Log it in a paper book because the digital system was down half the year. 3rd week in, I was already doing most of it on autopilot. That 3rd week is when I noticed the trolleys. The kill floor has an overhead rail that runs the length of the building, maybe 200 feet. During the day, carcasses hang from hooks on trolleys that roll along it. At night, the line is empty and the trolleys are parked in a row at the far end, past the scald tank. They sit there in a cluster, 30 or 40 of them, hooks down, until first shift pushes them forward in the morning. I came out of the mechanical room around 2, walked back onto the floor to grab a rag, and I heard the rail move. It's a very specific sound, a soft metal click, then a slow drag, like somebody pushed one of the trolleys along maybe a foot and stopped. I stood there in the dark with the rag in my hand and I listened. Nothing, so I told myself the building was settling. That's the kind of thing a maintenance guy tells himself. I went back to work. The next night I heard it again, twice. Once around 1:30, once close to 4. Both times from the far end of the rail. The second time I walked halfway down the floor with my light and pointed it at the cluster of trolleys, and they were exactly where they should be, in a neat row, but I could have sworn the whole cluster had shifted by 1 position. That's when I remembered the cameras. The security office was off the locker room. 6 or 7 monitors, grainy, some of them black and white. I wasn't supposed to sit in there, but nobody checked. I went in and pulled up the feed for the back of the kill floor and rewound it to 130. Nothing. Empty floor, trolleys in a row, no movement. I rewound further, fast-forwarded, watched 20 minutes of nothing. Then I heard, through the office wall, the same soft drag from the floor, in real time. I looked at the live feed for the back of the rail. Empty, perfectly still. I sat there for a long time. Then I went out to the floor with my flashlight and walked all the way to the back. The cluster of trolleys was in a different arrangement than it had been an hour before. There's a yellow paint mark on the concrete where the last trolley should sit. It was 2 feet forward of the mark now. I looked at the floor. There were prints on the concrete, wet prints, maybe 4 or 5, leading from under the rail back toward the drainage grates by the wall. Not from a boot, not from any shoe at all. Bare feet or something close, but too narrow. The toes were long. The heel was small, like a person walking on cold concrete with no fat on their foot. I stood over the prints for maybe a minute. Then I went back to the office and finished my shift sitting at the desk with the door locked and the light off. I didn't tell anyone the next day. What was I going to say? There's a guy sneaking around at night moving trolleys and I can't see him on camera. I'd get laughed out of the break room. Or worse, they'd think I was doing it myself for attention. So the next night, I went back. I brought a better flashlight from my truck, one of the heavy aluminum kind, and I brought a pipe wrench. Not to hit anybody with, I told myself, just to have something in my hand. I did my rounds early, greased everything by midnight. Then I sat in the office with the lights off and watched the monitor for the back of the floor. For about 2 hours, nothing. Then, at almost exactly 1:45, the last trolley in the row moved. On the screen, I saw it move. It rolled forward maybe 6 inches, all by itself. The hook swung a little, then it stopped. I got up and walked out onto the floor without turning any lights on. The emergency lights over the exits gave me just enough to see by. My boots on the concrete sounded very loud. When I got to the back, the trolleys were parked. Nothing was moving. The skull tank was empty and dry. The wet prints from the night before were gone, but I could smell something. Not blood, more like a wet coat that had been left in a closet for a month, sour and warm. I pointed my light down. Under the last trolley in the row, set into the concrete, was a drainage plate, about 2 feet square, steel grate. I'd walked over it 100 times. What I hadn't noticed, because you don't notice, is that the bolts on it were finger tight, not rusted in, not painted over. Somebody had been taking that plate up and putting it back. I stood there a long time before I bent down and lifted it. Underneath was the crawl space. Every plant like ours has a service tunnel under the kill floor, for drainage, for pipes. This one was low, maybe 3.5 feet high, and it ran under the whole line. When I put my flashlight down into it, the beam went a long way before it hit anything. But close to the opening, right under where I was crouched, somebody had made a spot for themselves. A folded blanket, army green against the concrete wall, a stack of cans, beans, tuna, a single-serving fruit cup, a gallon jug of water, half empty. And on a folded towel, 4 knives. Boning knives, the kind we used on the floor. Not stolen exactly. There were always a few missing. Nobody noticed. They were clean, not oiled clean. Recently washed. The edges caught my light in the way only a knife somebody actually cares about will catch light. I didn't touch anything. I put the plate back and I finger tightened the bolts the way I'd found them, because I didn't know if he was down there right then listening to me breathe. I finished my shift. I don't know how. I logged my hours in the paper book and I got in my truck and I sat in the parking lot until the sun came up. Then I drove to the hardware store on Range Line and I bought 4 sheets of 1/4-inch steel plate and I drove home and I didn't sleep. That night I came in early. I hauled the plates in on a cart. I told the guard at the gate I was patching a floor drain leaking into the trench. He didn't care. Nobody cared what maintenance did as long as the line ran in the morning. I pulled up the grate. Everything was still there. The blanket, the cans, the knives, exactly the way I'd left it. I didn't look for long. I laid the first plate across the opening. Then the second, overlapping. Then the third and fourth over the seams. I welded them down. 4 corners each, then a bead along every edge. I used more rod than I needed. My hands weren't steady, but the welds were fine. When I was done, the opening was gone. You could still see the outline under the plates if you knew to look. Otherwise, it was just new steel on the floor. I finished the rest of my shift like a normal night. Greased the trolleys, changed a filter, logged it. The next night I did my rounds and worked back to the rear of the line last, on purpose. My flashlight found the patch before I got to it. The plates were sitting on top of it, all 4, neatly stacked. The welds along the edges were split. Not cut, not ground down. Split, like the metal had been pulled up from underneath and the beads had given way at the seams. The grate was back in place under the plates, bolts finger tight. I stood there with the light on it for maybe 30 seconds. I didn't check anything. I didn't lift the grate. I turned around and walked to the office and I picked up the phone and I called the day supervisor at his house at 3 in the morning and I told him I was done. He asked why. I told him personal reasons. He asked if I'd finish out the week. I told him no. I left my keys on the desk and I walked out through the employee door and I got in my truck and I drove. I never went back to pick up my last check. They mailed it. I didn't cash it for a long time. I don't know who he was or how long he'd been down there. Nobody ever found out as far as I heard. Maybe he moved to another plant. Maybe he's still there right now, listening to the trolleys roll over his head in the morning. He knew I saw the crawl space and he wanted me to know he could get back in whenever he liked. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Comment below which 4chan story was your top pick from this video, and don't stop here, because there are plenty more creepy vids waiting on the channel. Take care, see you soon, bye.